So good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this meeting, which is part of the FuoriSalone initiatives and program. I would like first and foremost to thank our partners who are allowing us to do these things. ICA Group, which is in its third year of partnership with us. They made it possible for us to organize several events in the course of the past 3 years. And Brugnotto Group that collaborated in the creation of the installations that are in the courtyard outside. Tonight we're going to deal with a very relevant topic, i.e. social sustainability of projects and the central role of people in architectural projects. We have 3 people with us tonight, plus someone who could not attend and sent us a video instead. Tonight with us we have Benedetta Tagliabue. You certainly know. Her main workshop is in Barcelona, and then she has another one in Shanghai and one in Paris. But she's known in Italy as well. And then Stefano Minini, he is the project director of Mind for Lendlease. I think it's the largest redevelopment project in Milan, recovering the expo area, turning it into an integral part of the city. As well as Giordana Ferri, she's an architect and she's the director of social housing foundation of the Cariplo Foundation. And I'd like to thank them all for being here. So the first thing I would like to ask Maddalena to do for me is to show the video that Paola Deda just sent us. Paola Deda is the director of the Land and Housing Division of UNECE, a UN organization that develops guidelines for urban and local development for Europe in particular. We have a video from her that I think we might start watching, and then we will start with our talk.
Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to be at your event. Today, my duty is to introduce you to the San Marino Declaration on Principles for Sustainable and Inclusive Urban Design and Architecture in support of sustainable, safe, healthy, socially inclusive, climate neutral, and circular homes, urban infrastructure, and cities. This is a long title for a declaration that was meant to be developed for individuals. Normally, the United Nations develops recommendations and principles for governments to follow or local authorities. This time, the idea was to have something similar to what is the Hippocratic Oath for doctors. So this is meant to be addressed to those that are working in cities and for cities. And it's a sort of, as I mentioned, an oath to follow these principles when dealing with your cities and when designers. So if in the audience we have city leaders, architects, engineers, urban planners, designers, surveyors, building managers, if you simply work in a city or you work to design for a city and for the buildings, well, that's addressed to you. Let me introduce you briefly the principles contained in the San Marino Declaration. The first one is people centrality, social responsibility, and inclusivity. And it is really addressed to take in due consideration all the needs of individuals and households across all races, age groups, gender, cultures, and abilities and income levels whenever you are planning and designing. The second principle is about cultural identity, values, and heritage. Urban planning and design and architecture should respect the identity and cultural heritage of places and buildings, as well as the cultural values and traditions of communities. The third principle is resource efficiency and circularity. So every city, urban infrastructure and building should be designed in a way that limits the use of energy, uses only sustainable energy sources, reuses rainwater, and limits the use of the natural resource and reduces resource losses. In general, this is really about making your product, be it a city, a building, or something you are designing, circular, so that the waste is minimized or is even eliminated. The third the fourth principle is safety and health. Every city, urban infrastructure and building should be based on internationally recognized quality standards, as well as safety standards for workers, citizens, including the fire safety. In general, this is also a principle to remind us that cities have to be safe and healthy, and help the citizen to feel better, to stay in good health, and to protect their well-being. And nowhere and in no time like after a pandemic, we understand how important this principle is. The next one is about respect for nature and natural system and processes. Every city, urban infrastructure and building should be designed in a way that limits the impact of the ecosystem of surrounding spaces, including by respecting plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and natural habitats. The next principle is climate neutrality. We all know how important it is. Cities, urban infrastructure, and buildings should be designed and requalified to minimize the associated climate footprint. The following two principles are people smartness, so technology and smart information at the service of people and not at the service of IT per se, as well as resilience, durability, functionality, and foresight. City and architectural design should support solutions that make homes, buildings, and urban spaces resilient to natural disasters, especially those caused by climate change, and also incorporate the spatial adaptability to accommodate new conditions and usages over time. Last principles are about affordability and accessibility, a very important social principle. Cities and homes need to be affordable and accessible to all citizens. And then interdisciplinarity for cooperation and networking. Cities and urban spaces should be designed to foster cohabitation, community engagement, solidarity, and social cohesion. Last but not least of the principles is engagement. It is important to consult with and participate, and have the participation of local communities for whatever you design, being an urban project, small, medium, or a large scale one. So I had to give you this quite quickly, really in a nutshell, these 11 principles contained in the Declaration of San Marino, but I invite you to check it on our website so that you can really apply those principles every day, and that might be useful in your exercise of designing or planning for the city, the building, or whatever object at the service of people you are designing. Thank you so much, and I wish you a successful meeting. Thank you.
Very well, thanks a lot. I would like to thank Paola Deda. Of course, she's not listening because she could not attend. She lives in Geneva at the UN headquarters, and she's often been our guest, but this time she just couldn't. Now, based on the 11 principles, I have noted down 6 points, and I'd like to discuss them with you. Now, the first topic I'd like to address, I would like to discuss this with Giordana perhaps, and that is accessibility and affordability. So it is physical as well as financial accessibility to cities for people. Often as architects, we consider social sustainability in the form of places or in the form of public spaces, parks, and the same. But there's another topic, which is the financial accessibility, i.e. the affordability that lies at the very basis of social sustainability. Now, Giordana, what's your approach? Since you, as a foundation, deal with social housing, financial accessibility, i.e. affordability, is key to you. Yes, good evening to you all. Let me introduce the role of my organization. It's a foundation that was established approximately 20 years ago by Fondazione Cariplo, a banking foundation, to develop social housing essentially in Lombardy, but then these spread across Italy as a whole. We have created a prototype, a model project in Lombardy, which then became the very basis for the integrated funding system, which is a project by Cassa Depositi and Prestiti, the government bank, which is now being circulated around Italy. The 4 funds in Milan have been used to build approximately 5,000 apartments, 80% of which are at affordable rents, are rented at affordable rents. This activity is almost entirely taken care of by private players, as is often the case also in other countries. And in Italy, we sort of confuse the two roles. So we have a lot of publicly owned real estate, which is not the case in many other countries, because they have a lot more housing at affordable rates compared to Italy. But the housing property is not owned by the government or local authorities. Take France, for instance. In France, the government has a pivotal role, but they operate via a public-private system. Italy, together with Spain and Portugal, are the exceptions to the rule, because the public-private system is still very young compared to other countries. Consider that in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden, the system is only private. Now, we create the funds with which we work, which are ethical funds that have a very specific mandate. Let's now come to the issue of the rents, which is a very hot topic in this city, because there are very big pressures on the real estate market, which squeeze the prices upwards. And the city is also expanding. And up until 20 years ago, the city was the center plus a few neighborhoods around the center. And then you had the outskirts of Milan. And Milan is now expanding towards its peripheral areas. And therefore, the value of real estate also outside the inner circle where the canals are is so the valuations are increasing, and that makes it less accessible, less affordable to people who don't have the means to pay those rents. So what are we doing? The housing projects need to be part of a sustainable business plan. So when property is built, they have to pay back the initial investment in the course of time. So up until recently, and I'll make a comment at the end, because you'll know what I'm talking about, because we're all professionals. We were addressing the so-called working classes of the past. In other words, people who on average have an income of between 20 to 30,000 euros, not unfrequently 17 to 18,000 euros. So they can pay an apartment 500 euros for 80 square meters, which is the right rent, because it should be 1/3 of a family's income to allow a person to live in a break-even situation. In Milan, we also have a lower band, which is a public residential housing, which is addressed to the most fragile and vulnerable parts of society, which was inhabited in the past by teachers and a very diverse population, while now it is inhabited by very fragile people with very low income levels. So in Milan, what is missing now is the intermediate market, in between the very vulnerable people and people who have available income to pay for higher rents. And let me close on the recent pressures on development prices. You know that in the past couple of years, we've seen a huge increase of building prices that has skyrocketed, and that has an impact on our activity. If we want to preserve the rents that we have today without having to increase them to stay within the market, because we need to keep the rents affordable to nurses, bus drivers, and then some even some graduates who do gig work, are in gig jobs. I mean, if we want to keep the rents affordable to people who are needed in the city, we will have to reduce the number of apartments that we allocate for these people, while building apartments that will be rented at market value, so that we can pay for the lower rents. And also a proportion of public residential housing had to be added, and that is a very hot topic at present, and it's being discussed in Milan quite extensively, because Milan doesn't seem to be able to respond to these housing needs well enough. Okay, I have noted down 6 more points. Let us now move to the next topic while remaining people-centered. Benedetta, I would like to discuss with you the project that you developed in Naples, with a specific focus on the respect for cultural identities. Naples is a city that has a strong cultural identity, but at the same time, you redeveloped an area with a 1980 architecture by Kenzo Kange, and in your project, you tried to remove the deterministic aspects in the architecture and reintroducing the pivotal role, the central role of people. Could you please describe what you've done in that case, what you did with that project, and what it means to be respectful of a cultural identity of a place that had a very strong identity connotation, but in an area which in the 1960s had not been developed in this specific way? Thank you very much for this wonderful question. When we landed in Naples with our client, the subway company, the subway running company, we took a stroll through the office center, which was a place that had not been welcomed or accepted by the rest of the city of Naples. It was fabulous. Kange had developed it in a fantastic way, but probably in this case, this was applied in the form of perhaps a wish, a dream to make Naples a contemporary city with an office, a series of office buildings downtown, just like many other European cities or Japanese cities. And this plan, ideally also aimed at improving the traffic flows in the city. But this planning was more idealistic than possible. And it was just working against the natural way that Neapolitans have to experience their city. So it was like a platform where traffic was organized, which is just against the spirit of Naples. It's hard to understand how it works. Now the organized traffic is not working. The parking lots between the pedestrian precinct and the traffic spaces have become very dangerous, and that was the case immediately. And the pedestrian area, with this idea of the platform, was separate from the rest of the city. So perhaps it was too much in contrast with the nature of the city of Naples, so much so that it didn't work. Or perhaps it wasn't fully applied, only part of it just was developed the way it was originally intended. And then the offices, the apartments developed in a non-compliant way with respect to the initial project. And also, we started from the subway station side by side with the Circumvesuvian, the railway that just connects Naples to the area of Mount Vesuvius and the villages there. And so we found that the flows were not working and that we should restore them. The subway station is down below, and trying to reconnect the part below the surface in Naples is utopian, because you have archaeology. It's even harder to do that than in Rome, just imagine. But the idea was to go down, drill deep, and create this intersection with the archaeological area, trying to impact it as little as possible. And then they found all sorts of things, and it turned out to be very, very complex. And then going down to try and bring together the various aspects. So this city center, through the project of opening the subway station, was like getting the lava to get out in full daylight in Naples, to get, to overcome the over-planning of this area that just didn't meet the needs and the nature of the city. And so we tried to build a subway station that would introduce something similar to lava in the center of the office quarter. Okay, it's a project that we placed on the cover of the handouts. It's close to an ad. We went from a horizontally organized city to a space that operates vertically, connecting various levels. And then we've done away with the idea of the platform. That was the initial idea. We organized it in the form of a slope, sort of reinventing also the topography of Naples. And then we have this big roofed over area that combines the piazza with the lower level and then the level below it through the subway halls. And it's a wooden roof that introduces natural materials. And it's also like a landscape, like a skyline in its own right. Now, we have started discussing the relations between people, affordability. Now, what is the relationship between people and the spatial dimension? Now, with Stefano, I would like to address another one of the 11 themes, which is also one of the strengths, which is the relationship between people and technology, especially the new technologies, aka innovation. I read a very nice line, I think you wrote, that says, now getting to this goal is more complex than thinking of it, than devising it, than dreaming it. And I fully agree. It is true that Mind, the project, is very strongly, very powerfully, technologically connotated, not just for the way in which it is developed, but also for because of the basic idea. But I wanted to understand how hard it was to develop the idea. Well, it was hard. That's a fact. But also, there's a lot of vision behind it. Mind is based on a public-private partnership. Now, Lendlease, the private part, and Expo, the organization, was the public player. And this is based on a 99-year lease or a concession. When you sign a concession for 99 years, you will have to understand what you need to do. We have 500,000 square meters where with the hospitals, schools, and whatnot in the area. Now, we had to get over the problem of starting from a blank page. We had to overinvest in the ecosystem. So the first thing we did was also through deep management commitment, including senior management. So we had to not start from the master plan, but from the very tender for this concession, we proposed the ecosystem first. So we worked on two axes. First of all, creating the city of people, and then the city of technology, and then the physical city, side by side with it. Clearly, these two systems run in parallel. Now, this is almost 3 years since the signature of the agreement, and so we have the first 3% that we can already assess. It's like the first kilometer, and we have another 41 to go if you were a marathon runner. Now, the power of the ecosystem, the power of generating an ecosystem of companies and public players that are collaborating to the new idea of the city is helping us a lot, especially in a context that is not easy at all. With business plans that need to be revised all the time, and with issues that we'll need to address in the next 5 years. Well, of course, there will be several cycles in a 99-year agreement. And also that will lead to the commissioning. But you know, at the same time, that the relationships you have established will not just be there for the money, for the development as such, but for the idea of the city. And that makes it possible for an international company to remain interested in the project at all times, because there's an idea behind what needs, a vision behind what needs to happen. And that will help us overcome the difficulties of the coming months and years. Okay. I'll continue with you so that I can reverse the order of the questions, also because it falls in line with what you were saying. So you told me that you are counting on a longer time frame for the resilience of the project to bring to bear. And I think resilience is the right word in this case. And also, you wanted to organize a neighborhood that is socially sustainable. And I imagine that this concept is part of social sustainability. That is the fact that it will go beyond the mere real estate opportunity or financial opportunity, but that will create a community or an ecosystem, as you called it, and therefore this becomes the center of the entire issue. So this idea of the socially sustainable neighborhood is then associated with the city that is the 15-minute city. So the city where everything is within a reach of 15 minutes. Now, you are working on lots of aspects such as possible repurposing in the future and long-sighted vision. Now, you are one of the few who are committing for the long term, for the long run. And that is in line with this idea of what I'm doing today needs to be in line with what this area will become tomorrow. Is this relevant? I don't have an answer. And I don't even expect a pre-set answer on this, because I wanted to know how you bring together the idea of the ecosystem and the 15 minutes in a place that doesn't have much to do with those who thought of the 15-minute city, because you are creating a city that has a global scope. And also in the long run, how is this city going to transform over time, therefore exist and resist to major financial changes? and economic changes. I think that the first few notes of any song are the most interesting because they appeal, they attract attention. If you have a long-term perspective, what you do initially becomes particularly important. I'll tell you about a case in London. Now, we developed a project. I will not mention the name of the project, but the first three potential tenants were not relevant. The tax agency and others, they just couldn't just revitalize the project. At least they could not attract the fourth, fifth, and sixth potential tenants to complete the project because it wasn't appealing enough. It wasn't made appealing enough. So the initial notes were not appealing. What we do is to try and make the initial notes of our song or our project relevant. The first idea to face this idea of the ecosystem that was like a wave to us was not to demolish everything that existed from the Expo exhibition, but to repurpose it, also on a significant scale, because we have 20,000 square meters of buildings that have been repurposed and now host schools, corporate players like AstraZeneca, and spaces where startups can rent laboratories. And also we have a building with a sky deck where 10 startups are coming every month. They will spend 3 months here and 3 months in California. So we have a very strong idea in terms of spatial connotation as well as vision. So in a way, we are a startup because we did the so-called proof of concept in our world of innovation. And now we needed to escalate it. In a few years, the University of Milan will start a campus here. And the campus alone will bring 20,000 people in the area. So we're not just a village of 2,000 inhabitants today, but a city of 20 to 40,000, and just before completion, 60,000 inhabitants in just this neighborhood or sub-city. So the way you start doing things will create the wave effect, attracting the other 60,000 people. So we're working on this in the perspective of this vision. Now, the 15-minute town or city. It's an interesting point that you're taking. Our idea from the very beginning was not to create a business district, but to create a place that would encompass many of the ingredients of the rest of the city, so that it would be like an industrial space with an unmanned travel areas, schools, business spaces, and a ground floor which is permeable, which sort of contradicts the idea of tall buildings where you spend the day at 23 on the 23rd floor, and you will share the same ground floor where you can have a cup of coffee with people you meet there. So through the very specific spatial connotation that we are imparting, we would like to favor encounters between the public-private elements, research centers, the pharmaceutical company, etc., to recreate a part of the city as a community. Now, back to Giordana. Giordana deals with social housing. So one would expect that somehow the foundation will just deal with one topic, and very often that is done in cities. So what's your position in terms of dealing with a specific topic with one function only within a context where there's not just one function, but part of the city needs to be transformed with more complexity than that individual function? How can a foundation do that? How can it be flexible enough to meet its primary goal and at the same time understand the more general context in which it operates? Well, we had to be flexible because actually when we started out 15 years ago, the situation was totally different. the real estate market was stalling. We perhaps were the only ones who had resources enough to do things. And the areas that were at our disposal were peripheral areas. In the suburbs, to do social housing, we had to buy inexpensive land. And so we said to ourselves, what's the model that we might propose? We might be the groundbreakers, we might experience things. So we looked around and studied what was in existence, and we initially proposed a collaborative model. Our buildings always have common areas with ground floors that are inhabited and spaces managed directly and operated directly by the residents through a process of community engagement, of course. Because people will not do things on their own. They will be accompanied and supported to do so that our tenants will take care of their spaces and operate them. But that wasn't enough to us. We wanted to also introduce within the city something that would relate to the city itself. So the ground floor, although it's a small areas because it's not the same as the Mind project, it was fundamental and very unattractive for shops because, you know, in the suburban areas, there wouldn't be much of a footfall. And so our actions were meant to bring local shops and services. We attract those players there. And in terms of shops, the daring people only are attracted to our areas. They don't have to be conscious of the risks that they are undertaking. And so we have a full program to accelerate their shops, just like funds are given to startups. To us, every store is a new startup that we need to take care of so that they will remain as proximity shops in the area. And so we have also developed a process that would lead our shop owners to relate directly with the people who live in the neighborhood. In our buildings and in other buildings in the same neighborhoods, so that people will understand that proximity stores are very important in peripheral areas, in suburban areas, while on the other hand, the shop owners need to have access to the people living there and their needs. This is an important activity that we carry out. We're working on the abattoir area, in particular, which is a very important area, and we had already started actions in Merezzate of the same kind. So the biggest project had to be structured so that they would encompass all the complementary functions for the residential areas, which are key to us, and we devote a lot of energy to developing those. We ask a lot our planners from our planners, because it's much more time-consuming and harder to develop the outside areas that make a neighborhood livable and that engage the residents. These are permeable interventions where the intermediate areas should be used and not repel people. So in the course of time, we have developed strategies to help these shops survive, the businesses survive. It's not just a matter of physical buildings, which is all important. The investment also on the outside is important. But then there has to be a community level project favoring relationships with business people who open here. And sometimes, well, actually, very often, we have shops that are opened by our tenants in the area, and they need support to do that. And so we have a business accelerator helping these shops survive in the area. So it's at the same time a social as well as architectural project. And then there are similarities, regardless of the scale of the intervention and approach. I think that this idea of considering what Stefano calls an ecosystem, not to call it a community, which seems to be an interesting word, I think that is key. Let me close with one final question to Benedetta, and then obviously if you have questions here, feel free to ask them. We'd like to go back to the topic tonight, the human-centered design. That needs to necessarily translate into physical spaces, physical places. Let me go back also to one idea among the 11 points, which is still open for debate. That is the importance of cultural identities that we've discussed before, as well as at the same time the need to welcome diversity, which in one way is hard to reconcile. I mean, the two are hard to reconcile. Through your international experience, I'd like to hear from you how, while keeping people at the center, and it's hard to think of architectures without people after all, isn't it? I mean, how in the different places in which you have operated, how easy or how hard was it to bring together the identity inherent in the projects, the need to include other diversities, and also, very simply, the relationship with the human context in which you developed your projects around the world? Oh, that's a nice question. Beautiful. Well, a lot depends on the concept of society that one has in a city like Milan and with the citizens of Milan. I mean, the habits are not the same as elsewhere. I mean, because it's natural for people in Milan to have their habits. Shanghai, Shenzhen, or Taipei have their own. It's a matter of cultural habits that when you travel around the world, as we're doing now as architects, which wasn't the case before. Just 30 years ago, it was hard to be architects beyond one's area. Well, we're now all developing projects in faraway places. Now, for instance, with a project developed in China, in urban areas, it's hard to explain what is normal to us to people who live in the Orient and where these things are not normal at all, such as how you use public spaces or how people have an ability to consider a public space as something that they own and that they can take care of it, and how you feel as a group occupying a space. Piazzas are different in China than they are in Europe, and it's an area that is very interesting, very appealing. You need to investigate, and you have to pay a lot of attention to how people live in the area. I don't think there's a preset formula. Working in distant countries such as in China, I always have the feeling that evidently they're asking Western architects what they do because they want to learn stuff. But at the same time, we're there offering our projects because in turn we're willing to learn. So it's an exchange. A very interesting exchange that takes place, and a major one. And it involves some degree of risk, of course, because you never know if the project will be welcomed, if you're really meeting the needs of the society in that place at that point in time. Okay, we're now planning a square in Shanghai. We'll see if it works. It's interesting that these three questions that have been asked of three people who deal with different aspects. When it comes to this pivotal role of people, you all described a relationship to the public spaces, although in different forms, out of necessity or as a challenge or a goal. But in fact, all three of you just told us how in the relationship that lies at the basis of how a public space is built, you find the success or failure of a project. I have no other questions, but if any of you would like to expand, please use the microphone to do so. I heard about the shops, the stores, and I read about a proposal that involved the starting of new shops to support businesses, small-scale businesses in areas that need to be revitalized, also like that. And it's a project. The project is Sous l'éclair, which means open the shops, literally translated. Sous l'éclair is a project that we've engaged in with the municipality of Milan, with Impact Hub, with funds from the ministry, which to us is just the final goal of a process that I was describing. Now, since we have a number of projects going on in Milan, we felt the need to centralize all these activities. And in so doing, we created a small neighborhood accelerators to accelerate businesses initially as part of our action, but then also capitalizing on the competencies of other players. We shared a project with the municipality of Milan that was encouraging local businesses, development of local businesses for proximity stores. So Sous l'éclair is a project of business acceleration in neighborhoods. And it's not a physical place, it's a consulting activity that will help proximity shops to develop, to create the 15-minute city. Because the 15-minute city is built not in the central or semi-central areas, but in more peripheral areas, developing the entrepreneurship at the local level in the suburbs. And that also started out involving shops and shop owners. I have a question for Benedetta Tagliabue. Well, the project sounds interesting for one particular reason, I would say. It is an alternative project to a series of interventions on the subway of Naples that have just been implemented in the course of time. First, under the supervision of Bonito Oliva, and then the participation of many artists such as Minini and other artists from both Milan and the rest of Italy. So that compulsory museum, as it was called, is something that Neapolitans feel respect for. The Neapolitans, who are pretty unusual in their relationship to things. I myself was born in Naples, but from Piedmontese northerner parents. I mean, I wanted to hear from you what your attitude was when confronting this pre-existing situation and also the local spirit. And then I don't know if your project will work well or not. I mean, you will be able to tell us, and there will be some people other than the designer, because the designer always lives in a conflict of interest situation, but others will tell us if the project will work well or not. Okay, so then let me talk about another station designed by Oscar Tusquets, a competitor of mine. He also won an award as the most beautiful subway station in the world with all the ceramic tiles he used. And I saw a person on these outside ceramic benches outside the Toledo station take a cloth and clean the bench. So that's incredible. The Neapolitans themselves were surprised by the effect that these stations have had on them. I think it was a wonderful initiative. This idea of the compulsory museum, well, it's misnamed. It's just simply the fact of realizing that the public spaces that are often used, such as subway stations, because you need to take a subway, if it's beautiful, if it's familiar, if it enriches you spiritually, then it will improve your life. It's such a simple concept that it would almost sound absurd at the outstart. But when we started seeing the first stations improved, Minini, then Gao, Lenti initially, and then Spodreca, Alvaro Sis is now finishing an incredible station near the town hall, Municipio. So this was a very nice idea, and it was just scattered around the city. Are you part of this? Yes. But I received the assignment 20 years ago. The artistic part was left for after. Then one manager died in the meanwhile. Gianni Silva, he was the life and blood of the project, and that was an incredible loss. He was just incredible. So, you know, in our station, the budget went down. Initially, there was a ceramic roof. Now they said, okay, we don't have money for that. It hasn't been officially opened yet. I mean, the station wasn't even inaugurated. There's a junior artist who is doing something. Adrien Vescovi is the name. He is very young and French, but with Neapolitan grandparents. So he understands Naples, really. And he's doing an excellent job of developing the artistic part without funding, or close to being without funding. Then we also participated to the Grand Paris, like a circle line running outside Paris. We participated in the tender and won. I think that Grand Paris really relied on this inspiration coming from Naples. They will never admit to it, but that is what happened. I don't know if we have more time. I think we've extensively discussed. I think it's been 1 hour. So I was mandated to finish after 1 hour. And if you have no other questions, I would like to thank everybody, you first and foremost. And now we're waiting for you downstairs for the aperitif. Thank you very much.